Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Gilliland. I'm one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. We are here this evening on Get Vocal, which is being simulcast on Periscope and Facebook Live to talk about Mandalorian Chapter 13, The Jedi. We nerded out with some special content last night that's going on our Patreon for our live commentary. And check that out. It's going to be good stuff.
There are at least 2 instances where I squealed because I saw Baby Yoda.
It was Nari's first time watching it. You can't get better than that.
It's pretty adorable. I mean, Grogu is adorable, but this set a high bar right there. With me tonight, two of them have already said hello, is Thomas Harper, Nari Ely, and Gabby Martin. And we're going to dissect the legal issues of the Jedi. So,
wait, the whole Jedi Order, or
all of it?
Yep,
all
of it.
This is a 4-hour podcast, so just strap in. There's no CLE credit.
Yeah.
No breaks. No snacks.
Wait, I need to get a lot more beer.
Oh boy! Oh. So let's nerd out to begin with. We'll just start here before hitting the legal analysis. Gabby, what did you think of this episode?
It was so funny because I was watching it and I remember your comments on the first episode of season 2 that was, kind of quintessential Western. And for me, this felt more Western. Like this was super couched in the Western and just, it had all those trappings and it called back to the Kurosawa films, and it just kind of reminded me of my film appreciation classes in college. It was just great. It was perfection. Just, perfection.
Nari, your reaction?
So, yeah, I love this episode. I am in the process of catching up on Clone Wars, but I already love Ahsoka enough to have been extremely excited to see her. So that was really cool. I also definitely got the Kurosawa. There were, from the opening scene to the scene where, Ahsoka arrives at the village again for the showdown. Both of those were extremely Kurosawa.
Mm-hmm.
And in the best way possible.
Yeah.
And the Japanese motifs everywhere, including even, the clothing choice of or the costuming of the magistrate and her HK droids, was not like, too on the nose, but it was definitely on point. Let's put it that way.
Tom, your thoughts?
I was geeking. I fully expected and had trained my brain to get only a glimpse of Ahsoka, if that, at the very end of the episode. And Filoni just hit us right over the head with her right from the beginning. So I was blown away. The mention of a certain character that I guess we're getting into spoilers here. So, earmuff it if you haven't watched the episode. Probably turn this off and go see it first.
You should be watching this episode.
I know. Why are you watching Legal Analysis? Go watch this. But when they mentioned Grand Admiral Thrawn, few times am I legitimately surprised by anything Star Wars, and that I sat up is like 4 a.m. and I had nobody to talk to yet.
So I thought they would introduce Thrawn, and as soon as she said Grand Admiral Thrawn, my reaction was, called it. And don't get me wrong, I was happy at 1:30 in the morning seeing it. So it was glorious. Love this episode. Agree with everything that's been said, whether it's from the Kurosawa influence that's beautifully shot to just wonderful visual storytelling. I will add that I really enjoyed seeing Ahsoka as a skilled Force user in a fight. We really don't see enough of that in live action, with her jumping, running up walls to a degree, things that we saw in the Clone Wars that we just don't really see in live action. Like it wasn't in the sequel trilogy in a meaningful way. We do have some in Empire Strikes Back with Vader being able to throw objects at Luke in Cloud City. So there are things like that. But this was the most, I think, in-depth use of the Force in combat with making twigs break and distracting people, and
That was so clever.
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
cutting a tree trunk with the lightsabers and then throwing the part at the assailant. It's like, okay, highly skilled, and that was probably the most that we've seen with the Force in combat, so in live action. So
And I think what I liked and really appreciated was the kind of tiredness of the Jedi that we see in this episode, that we've seen, the Jedi in their prime in the prequels. We saw whatever you want to call the Jedi-ness of the original trilogies. And we saw kind of a very tired Obi-Wan, who was, had been on Tatooine for however long, and he kind of distanced himself from the Jedi Order. And the sequel trilogy was its own kind of unique thing. But I think here we see that really, Order 66 is still fresh. Like, that is still kind of in their minds. And, that they're tired and they're, kind of worn out. And it gives me hope if we see that kind of not just skilled fighting, but also that kind of war weariness in the Kenobi series. Like, that would be great, because I think that would give it a lot of depth and a lot of complexity to a show where it's basically going to be him on Tatooine. So
you feel like she's going to lodge an official complaint with the Force to just leave her alone at some point, because it's sort of like biblical tales where folks are just continually tested, by God, and she's walked away from the Order, she's walked away from all of conflict, and then continually she gets brought back in, and realizes that she's got a deeper, more meaningful role to play, and then here once again she finds herself called into things.
I have a different point of view. I don't think she turned away from responsibility ever. I think she's been on this journey from being fulcrum to organizing, the Rebel Alliance, with her role in that, to she's just following the Donald Balerso doctrine of just go out there and do good. So, and for those who, you guys might not have watched Magnum PI or Quantum Leap. He created that, and also the original Battlestar Galactica, which is just about, two people going out and like doing the right thing. And I think that's Ahsoka. Even though she's alone, she's still out there trying to do the right thing. So I don't think she lost faith. I don't think she's being continuously tested. I think she is one of those stalwart individuals like Kenobi, who isn't broken. They keep going on and trying to do the right thing. And I think that's quintessential Ahsoka, in my opinion. That said, let's jump into the law, because we open up with, again, another first in live action. She dual wields, and she just kicks butt for all of these henchmen, soldiers, perhaps sheriff deputies. It's tough to tell with the magistrate. It's just, I don't think they're bailiffs, but
I don't think they were voted into office either, even what happens.
No, I don't get the sense that was a democracy.
Yeah.
They're really using magistrate in a perverse way. But she's out there kicking butt. So what's the legal justification for her to take out all those dudes and deliver an ultimatum to the magistrate? And just for a law of war perspective, Nari, you're good at this concept. What were your thoughts?
So that's an interesting question if law of war applies here. I'm going to have to say no, because I can't see Ahsoka representing a sovereign power of any kind. The magistrate might, even if her people are oppressed. She clearly has some territory. It looks like she controls the planet, is my understanding. That just happens to be the only village on the planet, the capital of the planet, something like that. But I'm going to say the law of war probably doesn't apply here, just because Ahsoka is an individual. The Jedi Order, even if she were a part of it, and I believe she's not anymore, is gone, and it never was a nation state, right? It was some kind of, was a definite organized entity, but not a nation state. So, yeah, I'm gonna say law of war probably doesn't apply. Tom, do you want to agree, disagree?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, for the formal rules to apply, you've got to have an armed conflict, and I don't think there is one. And then it begs the question: I don't think I agree with Nari. I don't think that Ahsoka is representing the New Republic in any capacity here. I think she's out on her own. And at the end of Rebels, we see her. She was sort of reluctant to join the alliance to begin with. Bail Organa brought her in, and she sort of ran the intelligence operations. We'll call it like at arm's length for a little while until she got a little closer in the fold with the Ghost crew. But at the end of that sort of run, she walks away with Sabine. Not walks away from the alliance, but she's out on her own, doing another mission with another person that's not really a formal member of the alliance military. So she would be an unprivileged combatant at best. So somebody just taking the fight into their own hands. And then when you talk about the magistrate Elsbeth and her little cadre of folks there, I don't even know if I don't think that they're a uniformed military force. I mean, at best, they're folks that maybe subjugated this town. But, there's a big, take it in the real world. There's a big difference between, a guy that rolls into a town in Iraq and just sort of has despotic rule in some form or fashion, and then ISIS that's controlling territory and has some semblance of a government. So I think we're not able to use that framework here just because of the typical Star Wars weirdness of how this is all set up.
I just want to add a couple things. So one is that you're absolutely right, Tom. Control of territory is a condition for sort of sovereignty, but it's not the only one. I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, one of them is actually just as simple as being recognized by other sovereignties. And so in this case, even if the magistrate controls this planet, I don't know that she's been recognized by the New Republic. Other
than Thrawn, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah.
The Chiss Ascendancy has recognized this settlement? Maybe.
I want to add that if we were in a slightly different universe, right, if the Jedi Order was still a thing, if the Old Republic or the original Republic was still a thing, right, you could make an interesting argument about Ahsoka being, a peacekeeper in the sense that, the Galactic Senate would be able to authorize military force, peacekeeping force, to go in to resolve conflicts, assuming they followed all the right procedures in that version of international law, kind of like the UN would. But since that doesn't exist, I don't think that's an analogous condition.
And that's a good point, because at least I think we've seen the framework for what the New Republic is doing on the fringes of the galaxy in terms of deputizing local officials and offering them sort of a pseudo official role in this, law and order type system.
All that to say, though, and Josh, I might be preempting the next part of the conversation, but I don't think that means there's no justification. We had a long talk about this when it came to the episode with the Marshal, I think, and for example, whether he had any legal protection or justification for going in and liberating his town.
In a moment, let's get there. Gabby, your thoughts?
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think this is we've kind of talked about this Imperial remnant as kind of like a gang or, some sort of cabal or secret shadow organization. And I think that's kind of what you have here. You have the magistrate, and we'll talk about that in a second. But you have her and her kind of gang of hired mercenaries, for lack of a better term. I think Mando may even refer to them as that. He does say that the chief mercenary has military experience. But you have her gang that's kind of taken over control of the town. And Ahsoka is kind of a lone gang member coming along to kind of do battle with her. So I don't think this is no different than kind of a gang, altercation, if you will. It has no kind of legal authority to happen. Anything Ahsoka does really she doesn't have any legal justification to do what she's doing. I mean, does she have a moral justification? Yes, because the town is clearly not in the best of circumstances. It's being kind of held by a despot. But she doesn't have any sort of legal justification. And I think that's a very, very clear line to draw, is what's morally right is not always legally right. So
I would offer that she doesn't represent a nation state. Like, she looks like just an individual actor. But one way that I've thought about this is, imagine if the Catholic Church had a history of sending priests or nuns into combat to go rescue people, like to fight human trafficking, let's just say. That would be cool.
With or without lightsabers? Because that's going to be critical in forming my opinion of this hypo.
But
I mean, Pope Francis is pretty awesome, so
we could probably send a petition to him and see what he.
Headcanon, Pope Francis is a huge Star Wars fan.
Granted.
Just putting that out there.
Is that true?
No, I just hope it is. Like,
it definitely has to be.
Yeah, he seems the type, but that's not.
He's not agnostic about Star Wars.
So where I was going with this is, if like the church fell, but you still had followers of it, and they were still going out there, completing the doctrine of it. In this case, go out and help others who are being oppressed. That's what I think the category Ahsoka could fall under. She's not a member of the Jedi Order anymore because, one, she left, and two, it collapsed. But she definitely seems to be following the teachings of it, the true meaning of it. And she's doing things that the Jedi would have done, which just puts this into a weird category of, I think we could defend her for it and saying that she's legally justified for what she did, but it's in a category that we don't legally have currently. Like the Red Cross doesn't send troops in to go rescue people in shipping containers. Like, they just don't have a strike force to do that. That would be the world, and that would be kind of cool to see.
But they should.
I just wanted to point out, because my boyfriend James is a veteran of the Special Forces, their motto is actually De Oppresso Liber, which is to free the oppressed. So we already have a strike force there. Maybe we should just, make sure that that's their mandate and that's what they do all the time.
and provide them with lightsabers.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
That's absolutely required.
Yeah. Because
they created the Space Force using the Star Trek logo, so anything's possible.
And infringement issues. So focusing on there's a lot to unpack there. So
there's also the question of frontier justice here, and whether there's any likelihood that even if somebody in a position of power found out about this, that they would care to prosecute it. I mean, the New Republic has sparse resources. That's been readily apparent throughout this series, and presumably that sparseness exists to their capacity to exercise justice. They have to be selective in what cases they bring forward. I would probably wager.
Fighters, so.
I know that's the only two X-wings that are in the Outer Rim. And I would wager that they're still in the middle, probably of whatever series of war crimes tribunals, mopping up and dealing with remnants of the Empire there. So their hands are full. The odds that they're gonna come after Ahsoka Tano, like hero of the galaxy, hero of the rebellion, for mopping up a warlord out on the fringes of the galaxy, are probably low, and Ahsoka probably knows that on some level.
So let's talk about the magistrate. And so what's entertaining about her is she seems far more dynamic and sinister and effective than, say, General Hux. So she's got that going for her, and emotionally stable.
She knows her way around a staff too. That was surprising.
Yeah,
it's true.
She's a good fighter, so she's got all of that stuff, and hands-on leadership, and effective. So it's like Star Wars. We only saw Tarkin for a little bit. We understood he was bad, but that's all that we got the first time around. She is deadly. We have people hanging in cages, getting shocked. lots of bad things. So the term magistrate's used, and Gabby, I have a feeling you were the one who went to great lengths explaining that. Could you
Yeah.
illuminate us?
Yeah, no, I thought it was interesting because we've seen this term magistrate pop up at least twice now, right? Because we had we've had grief referred to as a magistrate, and now we have this other magistrate. And we discussed in some point about did they call Cobb Vanth a magistrate, or did they call him the sheriff? I can't.
He was the
recall.
marshal.
Just a marshal.
The marshal.
Yeah.
Okay. But the term magistrate, the fact that it's come up twice now, I thought it was kind of important to talk about what this term meant, what the legal powers that they have are. So this term dates back to the Roman Empire, and back then, it was kind of a catch-all term for somebody that was a judicial and an executive officer. Again, they didn't have many people in positions of power, so they didn't have a tri government like we have here. So they had people straddling the lines in different areas. So magistrate was kind of that person in ancient Rome and ancient cultures that was the chief officer. You know, they would carry out justice, they would carry out private law, and they would carry out executive functions. Here in the United States, the term can be used for a judge who issues warrants, reviews arrests, can sometimes be, depending on the state, it can become interchangeable with a justice of the peace. And then there's also federal magistrate judges, who are 8 to 4-term district judges who help the expediency of the court. But it's important to note that the context in which we're talking about here in Star Wars is really hearkening back to that older term of magistrate. We're not seeing that kind of United States use of the term. We're seeing that older, both grief, and it seems in this episode as well, magistrate is that kind of chief officer of the town or the planet, that they have these kind of broad range of powers over the citizens of the planet or the town, or however wide. We really don't get a sense of how wide their jurisdiction is in either episode. So it seems like the planets they're hopping in Mandalorian is just like a one-town planet. So
the grief, I think, gave a really good example of like your point to a T, right? At least his appearance in this season, because he suddenly stepped into this role, and the town has turned around. He seems on one hand like mayor, and on the other hand like judge, jury, and maybe executioner. I don't know. He at least handed down a massive sentence to Mythrol, and he's like actively managing that, while at the same time he's worried about, the issue of the planet becoming a shipping lane and being a valuable source of trade and whatnot. So he's definitely got the dual-hatted role. So I think you're spot on that they're using that traditional like Roman use of the word.
And clearly 2 ends of the spectrum as far as how to be a magistrate. There's the good kind. I mean, we can debate how good of an employer grief is, especially with the Mythrol. And then you have, I can't remember her name. I don't know why I'm so bad at Star Wars names, but
Kara.
Yeah, that you have these kind of varying roles of how to run a planet and a state. So,
and I would
take note.
Sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I would posit that some of that has to do with how they became magistrate. We don't actually see how Grief became magistrate, but given the conditions and how popular he seems to be, I would guess that he was elected in some fashion. I'm going to hazard a guess that the magistrate here in this episode was not popularly elected.
And
you just need to get the cape and the little clasp with the chain on it.
Yeah.
If you can secure that, then you're in.
And that brought me to my point, Thomas, that it does seem also that they have this kind of uniform that seems cross-planetary almost, because the uniform that the individual takes on at the very end, I don't know if the magistrate was wearing it beforehand, but that's the same.
She was.
So that's the same kind of insignia and cloak, if you will, that Grief had on, because obviously his outfit was a lot better than what he was wearing last season. So it's interesting to see that's kind of a demarcation of power, right? This is clearly that person that you can look to when you come into a planet and you know that that person is in charge.
And Carl Weathers makes one feel safe.
Well, he made one feel safe at some point of inflection during the first season.
Yeah,
That's right.
Again, after he got healed by the child, he was.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm changing my ways. We're going to turn this around. My bad. And look at what all the good that he's done, as opposed to scary lady with a staff who tortures people, which raises the issue of torture. So let's talk about why our justice system does not allow for prisoners to be forced to stand in an electric cage that shocks them. So that's what we call bad. And
cruel and unusual punishment.
Yeah.
There we go. Specifically not just bad. It is bad, but it is also cruel and unusual for Eighth Amendment purposes.
Yeah, so let's start with like, hey, this is torture, and let's talk about why it's torture. And I'll throw out the California Penal Code Section 206, which defines torture as every person who, with the intent to cause cruel or extreme pain and suffering for the purpose of revenge, extortion, persuasion, or for any sadistic purpose, inflicts great bodily injury as defined under Section 12022.7 upon the person of another is guilty of torture. Okay, well, the crime of torture does not require any proof that the victim suffered pain. You know, when you can see someone's skeleton because they're being electrocuted, you can assume pain.
They needed to turn it up that high so that they knew it would work. It was working.
Yeah, like when you don't,
it's too low. It's just
we don't.
how do you know that they can't get out?
They were trying, and you know, they don't have X-ray technology, so they thought they could just light them up. And I know for those who are wondering, great bodily injury under the reference section means a significant or substantial physical injury. And again, when your skeleton glows, you cross that line. So that's all bad. Nari, care to add anything more?
Yeah, so again, because I think the law of war maybe, does it apply here? Actually, so they're not combatants, so I'm not sure that like we need to necessarily get into this too much from a law of war perspective. This would definitely be torture under a law of war perspective. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah, and it's targeting civilians too, so...
Yes, so that's the other complication there. But when it comes to Eighth Amendment, the Eighth Amendment's actually quite interesting. What's been considered cruel and unusual has changed over time. And in some respects, it might be a good thing that it has, in the sense that the words that were picked for this are kind of inherently subjective, especially the one unusual. That is kind of an inherently relative term. So in that respect, it seems to make a lot of sense that it would adapt over time, you know, as various states and localities abandoned things like ear tagging or being put in the stocks as usual punishments, right? The federal government and then eventually the state governments through incorporation also probably should be banned from doing those. Cruel is also potentially a vague word, which we've also, I think, expanded over time in a good way. To the point where, you know, I think it's relatively safe to say in the modern justice system that it encompasses basically everything except for imprisonment. There's a lot of debate about whether or not the death penalty should fall within that. Another debate is about whether, for example, you know, if you try a juvenile as an adult, whether or not the punishment inflicted upon them is cruel and unusual. So there's still definitely territory where we have a lot of debate, but in general, we see the utter loss of freedom as sufficient retribution that we have to have extra good reasons to do something like put someone in isolation or things like that. And those usually relate to the safety of the prisoner themselves or the other prisoners or the prison guards if they're a huge hazard for some reason, but not as a punishment, right? So you can't have a court decide, or a court or a jury decide that the punishment here should be this person is imprisoned in solitary confinement for the rest of their days. We generally see, again, the complete loss of freedom, of autonomy and liberty as sufficient retribution. And everything else past that is just supposed to be, removing the person from society because we've decided they're dangerous, or rehabilitation. And generally speaking, cruel punishments would be harmful to the cause of rehabilitation.
And this isn't solitary confinement. They're put on public display to be hurt.
This is
They
like
can talk to each other.
Literally electrified.
Yeah. This sends a message to the rest of the town. This is done as an example, as a calling card of "Don't cross me."
Mm-hmm.
And there really is, I guess, on an international, with an eye toward sort of the international law aspect. Within conflict or outside of conflict, there's always an outcry. It seems to be universally accepted that torture is bad. Okay. And so I go back to the example of the kidnapped and murdered Washington Post columnist, Jamal Khashoggi, that was presumably tortured and then executed just a couple of years ago. And there was an international outcry about that entire process, right? And Saudi Arabia is not involved in a conflict in Turkey. There was no war going on that this was fit within the framework of. This was just the torture and murder of an American citizen at that. And I think you saw exactly how seriously the international community takes this sort of thing. And even in a conflict that's just internal to a country, or in this case to a planet, if Corvus, you want to consider what's going on there, some sort of like local hostilities that Ahsoka is stepping in to, we'll say, mediate, that there's still
aggressive
like
negotiations.
Minimum protect. That's exactly right. You win tonight. 10 bonus points. There's still a basic set of protections, right, under the Geneva Conventions and what's known as Common Article 3. In armed conflicts that are not of an international character, it's not a free-for-all. You don't just get to pass go and do whatever you want on the battlefield. Things like torture, things like inhumane treatment of others are still prohibited under the law. So I think no matter how you slice it, this thing is completely out of bounds.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, because I'm looking at our outline here and it says civil rights violations. I think the huge thing to consider as well is not just the torture aspect of it, but probably the lack of due process, that these people were probably, given how the older man reacts to the droids kind of wandering the city, and he hides his children immediately. These people were probably snatched off the street. Probably, maybe they had some sort of defiance. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they just looked the wrong way. But they were probably snatched up. We're not given a hearing. We're not given a trial. And so their punishment comes without due process. So that's another huge, that's its own kind of complex issue, but that's another huge violation here. And kind of a mark of this kind of despotic rule of the magistrate in this little town.
She's not a nice magistrate.
No.
That was well said.
Yeah.
She needs some lessons from Carl Weathers, clearly.
You ever think of
I like to think she would be the equivalent of like a normal magistrate or judge taking the gavel and being like a deadly martial artist just with the gavel alone, like jumping off the bench and just swinging it around and clearing the courtroom.
Yeah, we don't want them doing that. So no.
At least not before a fair trial.
Having
unless provoked.
Yeah, having interned for a federal magistrate judge, I can tell you that tensions get that high in a courtroom, but we still don't want that to happen.
No. Oh boy. So yeah, there's a lot that happens with her. So when Mando is introduced to her, first off, when those guards come up to him, is that an arrest? Was he being detained by being told that the magistrate?
Oh, I think it's a border checkpoint.
So, Wonderful nerd you. But we have the magistrate and Mando talk, and everything the Mandalorian says is technically correct, which is important just from if he was in a deposition. And
or under oath in any circumstance. It's up to the attorney asking the questions to ask the right question.
Right.
so everything he's answered was technically correct. So he doesn't lie to the magistrate. But she asks him to go out and kill Ahsoka. That's murder for hire or solicitation. And like forms an agreement with, hey, you can have this Beskar spear, which I think we'll see again when Mando versus Moff Gideon, because that's foreshadowing, to, go kill a Jedi or a former Jedi. I don't know how we classify her. That said, did anyone else have that reaction of this is murder for hire?
As you heard in our live watch party, yes, that was my first instinct, was this sounds like a contract against public interest.
What is a contract against public interest, Nari?
Yes, so in general, you cannot contract for things that are themselves illegal or otherwise, exactly what it sounds like against public interest. So, like, for example, this is why you cannot enforce a contract for, let's say, murder, sex, drugs, sex if you're not in Las Vegas at least, in a court of law, right? The court is going to hear your legal argument and then say, I'm sorry, you tried to contract for something that is illegal and cannot be cognizable by the court. Mm-hmm. So in this circumstance, in some universe in which the magistrate brings Mando before an actual judge and says, I, had a contract with this guy, he was supposed to kill this Jedi and he failed to, the judge would just throw it out right away and say, sorry, this sounds like a contract for murder. Also, let's get the sheriff in here.
Bailiff, go arrest the plaintiff.
Yeah, I'm really concerned about whatever trip you had to Vegas. So...
Well, I presume that there are courts in Vegas that would hear a prostitute's a legal claim for a breach of contract, but I have not had that experience personally. No.
Still concerned. That entered your brain, so okay.
Come on now, Las Vegas is the hive of scum and villainy. We all know this.
This is true. It's the Mos Eisley of the U.S.
Okay then. So we can. No.
But I think with this contract, putting aside that it would never actually be enforced because it is technically what the magistrate is asking for is a crime itself, solicitation, because you can't contract people to kill other people. But one thing Nari and I were discussing earlier was, putting that aside, is there actually acceptance on this offer by the magistrate? And we were talking about different ways of acceptance. And I'll leave Nari to posit the actual law. But I think we've now entered a dimension for the restatement 4th of contracts, soon to be published in 2021, that this contract and the contract he later has with Ahsoka, which could be considered a counteroffer or an additional contract, negating the first contract, but both are accepted by screen swipe because we never actually see what Mando's response is to the contract. They just swipe to the next scene. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be in Restatement Contracts 4th, coming out on May the 4th, 2022. So be prepared. Yes. Taught in a law school near you.
Yeah. So the thing that came to mind for me, and I mentioned this during our live stream, but I did a little research so that I could actually speak about this in a more educated fashion sense, is there is in a very rare exceptional circumstances, such a thing as acceptance by silence. So it's very exceptional. Ordinarily, an offeror does not have the power to cause the silence of the offeree to operate as acceptance. There's a limited specified number of conditions that are listed in the restatement of contracts. And one of them, I'll just list off a couple of them because I think one of them may apply here. So where an offeree takes the benefit of offered services with reasonable opportunity to reject them and reason to know that they were offered with the expectation of compensation. So that could be interpreted here so that when Mando asks the magistrate, where can I find her? That was essentially a service she was providing. The other one could be that where the offerer has stated or given the offeree reason to understand the dissent may be manifested by silence or inaction, although here's the hook there, and the offeree in remaining silent and inactive intends to accept the offer. So probably the former, not the latter. Either one is a little strained, but it was a fun way to bring this in.
Although you could also say in this case, barring, again, public policy reasons, that a murder for hire contract would technically be a performance contract, right? That you don't get the money until that Mando brings the magistrate Ahsoka's head. So, and I mean, because you kind of see that flipped around, right? When Ahsoka appears in the village, she tosses his armor plate on the ground, which supposedly was what the magistrate was accepting, kind of in the reverse. So that would theoretically be a performance contract, but Mando wasn't going to get the Beskar spear until he killed Ahsoka and brought the magistrate evidence of said death.
I love that this functions. This is like Star Wars getting into pure contracts 101. Like this should be like clipped and then shown in your average, like given as an assignment, and then somebody has to brief this scene in class the next day during the first semester of law school, because it's, you know, your basic contracts, you know, offer acceptance and consideration, right? Your core tenets there. And so often in Star Wars, they don't really like talk in those terms, but in this episode, they kind of did, which is really, I'll say awesome. I think the four of us would agree that it's awesome. Maybe non-lawyers out there are like, ugh, what? But, you know, Mando points out that he doesn't have a deal as far as he's concerned with Magistrate Elsbeth. So, you know, everybody, I think with a law degree or a law license or a law student, like sat up in their seats and they're like, legal things? So, anyhow.
Absolutely. And in general, so despite using this as an excuse to discuss acceptance by silence, I do think that Mando had a sit down with his lawyer before this encounter and understood some of the general outlines, at least, of what acceptance was, and towed that line, kind of like how he towed the line with the guard at the gate to tell the truth. Just not help him along with providing more information than what was asked. And in this case, I think I agree with Mando that he did not actually accept it, and was very careful to instead just ask where he can find the Jedi, to not say, yes, I agree. I will kill the Jedi.
Would be an interesting argument from the magistrate's standpoint if the location data is considered like proprietary information or information that she otherwise wouldn't have divulged, and you guys hit on this, but you know, his actions, his, you know, I guess silent actions induced her to believe that the contract was accepted, and therefore that was the only reason she divulged this information. So, you know, she could raise that sort of equitable argument and say, well, you know, he got something he shouldn't have had if there was no bargain. I wouldn't have given it up if I thought otherwise.
Yeah. And
any law school professors out there listening, this definitely should be a hypo for class discussion.
Yeah. And to Nari's point, I want now a like Marvel type short where you see that Mando actually has like a Babu Frick style little space lawyer on board the Razor Crest that he's getting advice from.
I'm glad you heeded my lessons.
Or a droid head that, you know.
Yeah. No, it has to be like a tiny little like Babu Frick just like saying kind of crazy things. That's what it has to be. that it just has to happen.
He
Please.
like he's got a little bed made on top of like the restatement
He
for
has a drawer.
contracts. Yeah, it's just carved out of a case book. That's where he lives.
That'd be a weird retainer agreement for with someone who's your client, but all kinds of ethical issues there. I want to highlight some of the case law that addresses contracts that go against public policy. And just to highlight one, this is Bondcoat Camp v. Ayers from 2006. It's from Virginia. And it's the more complex question is determining whether a contract is void because it is against public policy. Public policy has its place in the law of contracts, yet that will o wisp of the law varies and changes with the interests, habits, needs, sentiments, and fashions of the day. Courts are adverse to holding contracts against public policy unless they're illegally.
Legally.
Sober too.
This isn't a
You
science
two
fiction.
broke Josh.
I know. Wow. It's clear and certain. So the term public policy is vague. Another case, and this is interesting with forming a contract that specifically dealt with solicitation or murder for hire, as the contract was not a later independent act but grew immediately out of the illegal solicitation and was part of the same transaction, being inseparably tied to the use of the application blank illegally distributed. The contract was tainted with the illegality. Oh my God, what's happened to me? So you can't have illegal contracts. So like that's the thing that boils down. You can't say, I want to hold you to specific performance to go kill somebody. No. Like
I do wonder whether that concept of, the variable nature of it has some traction here for the magistrate, because I think back to the Clone Wars. Nari, I don't know if you've seen the Bounty Hunters episode where that little town on Seleucami, those Silum farmers have contracted with some bounty hunters to provide them defense and protection against Hondo and his criminal gang that's sort of repeatedly attacking and stealing their crop. Is this a situation, or could the magistrate argue that they've been under sort of siege by Ahsoka, this rogue Jedi who seems bent on taking down the settlement itself and whatever else, and so it's absolutely necessary, because the New Republic isn't out here to provide protection from a threat like that they be able to hire the services of a contractor like Mando to go out and do that work.
Mm-hmm.
So this would be interesting because it calls back sort of, again, the frontier justice thing with a town marshal putting out a dead or alive poster, mm-hmm. Wanted dead or alive. Maybe you could interpret that's what's going on here. I think a key distinction or a key prerequisite for that would be this magistrate, number one, actually being a law enforcement, a legitimate law enforcement officer. We've discussed the many reasons to doubt that. I guess the other problem, though, is that, generally speaking, I think it's I did some research on this, and I not hours and hours and hours, but I did do some research on this, and I believe it's largely mythological or folklore, the dead or alive part. It's generally speaking, if you are a bounty hunter, either because you're in the Wild West and the law has put out a bounty for the capture of someone, or because you've been deputized even. And in either of those circumstances, you're still bound by the rule that you can't use deadly force unless you have to under certain circumstances. This is not a dead or alive. This is a dead. I want this person dead. And as Gabby pointed out, I don't see a lot of due process here. Even if this person, even if the magistrate thinks that Ahsoka deserves the death penalty for some offense, this is not following a trial. This is just sending out Mando to execute.
Yeah. You try Mirandizing Ahsoka with her dual lightsabers.
Yeah.
Good luck.
And kind of to that point, Nari, it's different than what Mando was kind of contracted for in the first episode of season 2, where he's contracted to kind of help destroy this beast, if you will, that's destroying the town and kind of killing citizens. So that's, and we talked about this then, that's no different than, kind of in Florida when they had wild snakes and, that were overrun and all of that kind of stuff. But here, this is another kind of living person. This is murder. And we can trace murder back as a crime, kind of the highest crime back to the earliest civilizations, right? The Code of Hammurabi. This is one of the oldest crimes, if not the oldest crime, on record as being something you cannot do. And so regardless of the harm that is, causing it, it's kind of deeply rooted in that thing of killing somebody else is wrong. So again, that idea that you could capture her, if she had said, bring her to me and like, I'll dispense justice or whatever, that would be totally acceptable, whatever justice is. But that would have been fine. But saying I want her head, basically, that's not fine.
It's very evil queen. It's
And I just want to point out for listeners who may not know, Gabby here pointing out the Hammurabi Code is extra special because the Hammurabi Code is the oldest written codified law.
And I've gone to the Louvre twice. I've cried every time I see it because if it did not exist, we would not exist as lawyers. So that if you are in France and do go to the Louvre when traveling is a thing again, it is a must-see. And it's usually the least crowded area of the Louvre. So go see it, and it's just amazing. Yeah. Don't go see the Mona Lisa. Who wants to go see the Mona Lisa?
Some people are listening to this and saying, where do I go back in time to destroy this and get rid of all you?
Well, there's there's another set of that one of which includes "Thou shalt not kill," and we've had that law for a while. So with that said, let's think about the other issues that we have with the contract with Ahsoka for let's go liberate the town. I think it's similar analysis, but the wrinkle here is a defense of others argument of is the town in immediate danger requiring being saved, because Ahsoka does say they're already suffering for all of the horrible things the magistrate and her goons are doing to those poor townspeople.
And again, this is where that kind of, because basically what she's asking Tim to engage in, because she doesn't have any authority to kind of deputize him or pass on any legal authority to him, what they're engaging in is vigilante justice, right? And so again, it goes back to that point of just because something is morally right, and it is kind of the right thing to liberate the town, it does not mean that it is legally right. However, to Thomas's earlier point, it's unlikely that, the fact that they installed a kind of better, kinder, fairer magistrate, that the Republic is really going to come in and say, oh, you shouldn't have done that. We really didn't like the way you did this. It's unlikely. So it's kind of those conflicting elements of the practice of law that, you have that kind of moral, legal straddle, and then you also have just because there's a law against it, or there's kind of recourse, depending on whether you're in the civil or criminal side of things, is that something to be pursued either by the prosecuting authority or by the other party who has the ability to seek recourse?
If I could add just one more layer on top of that, we don't know all the details about the legal system being set up by the New Republic. I don't know why they haven't just published a code for us to all peruse. But if we assume that there's a certain amount of federalism, like we have in the United States, this is one of the advantages of having a fair amount of local rule, is that at least in the United States, a vast majority of criminal law is state and local. Very little of it is federal. So presumably the New Republic has a similar thing where there's, certain subsets of crimes that are going to be prosecuted and enforced by the New Republic itself, but presumably a lot of criminal stuff is going to be handled by the planets themselves and the local government. So in this case, you're not just dealing with, I think, a New Republic prosecutor who will decide, you know what, I probably shouldn't spend my resources here. I think you might have the planet electing a new magistrate who then is like, you know what, do I really want to spend all my time going after the person who just liberated me?
And that happened in this episode. We see that like one of the very first people that Mando interacts with ends up becoming the magistrate. If we're considering wearing the cape and chain as the indicator there, I also think.
I think they had a snap election.
He might have been the magistrate before she arrived.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
True.
That's also
yeah. So you're exactly right. He's
either way. They're very happy.
And there's not. I mean, not that Ahsoka is acting as an arm of the New Republic, but there is plenty. I mean, every year, it seems, there are situations where one government or another goes in with some force to free hostages or free folks that are in situations like the prisoners there right outside the magistrate's gates. And so, you'll hear about a special forces raid here or, this or that. So that's not unheard of that. That amount of force would be used to rectify a situation. And in fact, Ahsoka really only focuses, I mean, she says a little bit about the magistrate, but she specifically tells Mando that the prisoners have to be freed. And she doesn't really get into the information that she needs or why she's really going after the magistrate other than, hey, this is somebody bad. Let's go take care of her. Also, the prisoners need to be
So I will postulate the following. First, Lincoln said during the Civil War, when challenged that succession should have been handled in the courts, the answer to that was mass treason exceeds any court's jurisdiction, which is why armed conflict was needed to put down the rebellion committed by 11 states for their claimed right to own other human beings. That said, if the gentleman we saw who told Mando don't talk to any of us was the deposed magistrate, he and Ahsoka seem to at least know each other or acknowledge each other at the end. Perhaps he was the one that contacted Ahsoka to begin with, that got her to that planet. So if she's acting under some color of authority from the government in exile or government in prison to liberate them, that puts it in a different situation. That not everything can be resolved in a courtroom. I'm not arguing for vigilante justice. I'm highlighting the need that there are some situations where force is required. War is one of them.
This may be a great opportunity for us to remind our viewers that nothing on this show should be
We're not advocating the overthrow of any government.
Do not become Batman, people.
Yeah, no. But
At least wear something more than hockey pads if you're going to go out and do it, as we know from the Dark Knight trilogy.
Yeah, and just, again, there are great lessons from the Watchmen series on HBO, so don't do that. That said, this is more like a military liberation campaign to get people out. So that's my view, and perhaps there's some legal justification that the government that had been deposed had asked Ahsoka for help.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting too is perhaps, and this is kind of a post facto legal authority that she's given, even if he's not the deposed magistrate, he certainly becomes the magistrate after the fact. And I wonder if she's given some sort of deputization or legal authority, because they kind of like walk, hand in hand back into the village, like, hey, like there's still more to do. So I wonder if anything else happens in that town, if she has legal authority now, kind of after the fact, regardless of the circumstances that led to it in the beginning. Although I do think the idea that, he was the deposed mayor and was the one that contacted her is an interesting theory.
I just want to say hi, Steve.
Hey, Steve.
Oh, I think Josh.
I think we broke Josh. We also broke Josh's internet too. I thought he was oddly silent. So.
I know.
Nope, there he goes. He'll come back.
Oh.
There was also the issue of he has another sort of contract formation with Ahsoka. He thinks he has a deal with trying to get Grogu. That's going to take a while to get used to saying.
I'm sorry.
But he thinks he strikes a deal to. Yeah, I know. We talked about this last night that it will, everybody will get there, but it's sort of the reverse of Yoda, where we knew Yoda's name but not what he looked like, and then we saw him and we're like, oh, okay, that's weird. We'll just go with it. Now our brains are just trying to catch up. So yeah, but he thinks he strikes a deal. She does a little testing of him. Grogu proves he can use the Force pretty well. He agrees to go liberate this town, and then lo and behold, she seems to change things on him after they get done and says she can't train Grogu.
Yeah, that just drove me nuts, because it's interesting because it goes back to this idea of, is there a right to education? And in the United States, unfortunately, there's not a constitutional right to education, no matter what anybody tells you. And all our jurisprudence so far is that states have to allow students to go to school, right? This is the kind of Brown versus Board of Education type cases, that students should be allowed to go to school. But that's it. There is no jurisprudence so far on the quality of education that schools have to provide. As far as Supreme Court cases, there's certainly lower court cases, and back and forths, and even as recently as May, states sue their state government over the quality of schools, but there's no kind of defining laws or kind of standards for what kind quality of education a school has to provide in the United States. However, there is the Convention to the Rights of the Child, the UN Convention to the Rights of the Child, which guarantees education to every child, to anybody who has signed on to that convention, of which the United States has not. Surprise, surprise. If you go into international law, you will find that there are very few treaties that the US has signed on to. And it encourages educational opportunities, and that it's basically says that kids should have not be illiterate, and that they should have access to scientific and technical knowledge. And this is all students. So there's kind of that right to education. And I think you could argue that Grogu has this right to be educated in the Force. And what got me thinking as I went on this kind of train, having, a background in disability advocacy, is that there's also the idea of, would you consider Grogu to be kind of, if not like a gifted student, is he's certainly, he's differently abled. And so he would certainly, if he was in regular school, he would require an IEP, an individualized education plan. And he would have to be his education may fall under what's called the IDEA, and which guarantees free, appropriate public education to all children with disabilities. And this is where you get things like the IEP. And there are procedures to test for students' capability, how to test them, how to provide education to them. And part of what the IDEA requires is that the testing cannot discriminate or be racially or culturally discriminating, and has to be communicated in their own, in the child's native language, which I thought was interesting, because that's clearly applicable here, because Grogu doesn't talk. And that's how we get the name. That's how we get so much information of him in this episode, is that he's communicating by the Force. You could consider the Force his native language, right? That's, as of yet, how he can communicate. So I think it's kind of not fair that that Ahsoka kind of, pushes him off and doesn't allow him to receive an education by her, because now, barring any kind of legal implications, she's certainly making it harder for Grogu to receive an education, because she's like, oh, go to this, like, you had to come here. You had to go on this 5-episode journey to get here. Now you have to go to this temple and put him on a rock. And then, like, if a Jedi may hear it, the call of the rock. So it's making it infinitely harder for Grogu to get this kind of basic scientific and technical education to master his full potential.
I also think, I think of it, because I do a fair amount of work with in terms of nonprofit, like, religious organizations, and I think there's a First Amendment question here, because traditionally, and this is a whole, like, rat's nest to get into, so I won't dive too deep, but if you think about the Jedi Order as a religious organization, like, equate it to the Catholic Church, right? The Catholic Church has Catholic schools that are administered by the diocese or archdiocese. They are not beholden to the public school system or its administrators or to the state, other than to meet certain criteria and whatever that the testing requirements are for the jurisdiction of that state. But beyond that, it's the church running the school and making decisions about enrollment, disenrollment, disciplinary decisions, all those sorts of things. And traditionally, there's a big hesitancy on the part of courts to get involved in, what I would call, like, ecclesiastical decisions. So in other words, the court stepping into the shoes of, in this instance, a bishop or a member of the Jedi Order. And it's clear from at least the prequels that the Jedi Order is insular, and they run their own school. They run their own training. There's no interference from the Republic, right? Not everybody gets to get in, and they make their own decisions, as Yoda told Qui-Gon, about who will be trained and who won't be trained. And, no matter the skill of the individual concerned or their background or their need for it, like, Anakin being a slave and really being destitute and being skilled, there's no guarantee that you're going to get in and be trained. And at least here in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has ruled that in terms of decisions of enrollment or disenrollment, there's a case involving 2 students who were expelled from a Catholic school. And the parents argued that this was arbitrary and capricious, that the court should step in and deliver all sorts of damages against the diocese and the school for making this decision. And the end result was that the court said, we're not going to tread into that ground, because the moment that the court starts trying to make decisions of, in this case, canon law, or in the Star Wars case, Jedi law, they've sort of lost themselves. And in terms of the First Amendment, arguably you're trampling in on the free expression of religion if you want to attach that line of argument to it. So I think the Jedi Order, for its part, or Ahsoka, as not a representative of the Jedi Order, but as a well-trained Force user who has a responsibility to maintain the integrity of the Force, for lack of a better term, I think they would push back hard on the implication that a secular Star Wars court would step in and second guess their decision about whether to train Baby Yoda, Grogu.
But I would counter that, because clearly I would lean more to Ahsoka's decision being arbitrary, and I think there's more evidence of her decision being arbitrary and capricious, given that she even says that Grogu was a member of the Jedi Temple and he was educated at the Jedi Temple, and somehow managed to escape and not get slaughtered by Anakin. And so he was kind of already past that test of Yoda and the other masters, the same test that Anakin went through. So he was already kind of accepted into that practice.
He got disenrolled when Order 66 happens.
Well,
not by choice.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the name of the case, and I can't, forgive me, but I know that there was a Supreme Court case, or at least a circuit court case, involving a janitor who worked at a gymnasium owned and run by the Mormon Church, and one of the conditions for employment was that you had to have a certain kind of certification, which was a religious certification, that you were basically said you were a member of good standing within their church. And for various reasons, I can't remember what the specific cause of him being decertified was, but the plaintiff in that case was decertified, and was trying to get reinstated, and the court decided that it was an ecclesiastical matter, even though the effect was that it, terminated his employment. So you can, in some circumstances, at least as a First Amendment matter, have the right to disassociate someone from your religious association, in ways that trump a lot of other, protections that we have in the legal system.
I mean, all of this just bothers me because, one, he's a toddler, and
he's 50 years old.
But he's biologically a toddler still.
He's older than you are. All of us are.
You know what? That's fine because
he's a grown man.
He's still a toddler. Toddlers need parents. The fact that Ahsoka's saying he's too attached to you as his father figure, that's BS. I mean, that's utterly bonkers. Even if the Jedi Order was taking kids at age 2 to go into the Order, he's barely that of anything. Moreover, he's a refugee because he was persecuted based upon religious beliefs, being in the Jedi Temple, and then also arguably kind of a form of racial status as well because of his midichlorian count. So I have a problem with Ahsoka saying, no, I won't teach him because he's attached to you. And it was attachment that saved Anakin from the Emperor because of his love for Luke. So it just highlights the fallacies with writing a really stringent Jedi Order code that says you can't be attached to anything.
Yeah, that's the question, because I haven't gotten far enough in Clone Wars and such. Ahsoka left the formal Jedi Order, right? I don't know that she should be bound by that anymore. I hope at some point she's more self-reflective about whether or not that was a good rule to be following.
Yeah, she left for a reason because she had problems with it. So being able to say, we're going to raise him and raise him right, it's like telling a kid or telling a little boy, you can't cry. Only sissies cry. Okay, you're messing with the development of the child at that point. This is similar. You can't be attached to your parents because it can make you weak. Well, we don't follow Aristotle.
Oh no, did we lose topic?
No.
Well,
and
the Jedi Order struck back and ended his argument.
I think my thing too, and I was having a conversation with somebody on Twitter about this, is you would think that the Jedi or ex-Jedi or whatever would have learned the problem. And it's funny because Ahsoka even invokes Anakin, but I think you would have thought that they would have learned that taking a hard line stance when it comes to parents, they would have realized their mistakes, right? Because Anakin
doesn't lead to good outcomes.
They ripped him away from his mother, and they're like, she'll be okay in slavery. And look how that turned out. Like, you would think there would be a note there, like a little notation that says this rule does not apply to parents. Like, let them have whatever relationship they want with their parental figures. Do not, mess with that.
And I think, quite honestly, I think while she probably harbored some genuine concern, there was a little bit of I found it to be a little pretextual because she's on a bigger mission, right?
Mhm.
She honestly doesn't have time to train Baby Yoda to step away from this mission, whatever she's doing with Grand Admiral Thrawn, but she can't or won't divulge any of that to Mando, so it's just easier to, I guess, in a way, tell this sort of scary story about what might happen to him and
Did
and
she,
whatnot.
again, you think she would learn the dangers of not telling people what's going on? Because if her and Mace Windu had talked just a little bit more, they would have realized what was going to happen. But no, we're cursed with bad Lucas writing for that. Instead, it's like, did Mando tell her about Moff Gideon? Because he, did say the Empire is still hunting them, even though it fell. What details did he share? And why is she not saying, like, well, maybe my guy's related to your guy? Because we have people who still think they're part of the Empire and are doing horrible things. So again, that's just, it's bad to not trust people is what this boils down to. And
Although I can see Ahsoka having trust issues.
This is true.
Yeah, but 20 years later, or 30 years later, because when we see her in Rebels, it looked like she'd gotten over those trust issues and she had learned to love again. And it was Ezra that kept her from dying at Vader's hands. So why? It irritated me.
Also, I wanted to throw out there, because we discussed the acceptance by screen wipe for Mando and the Magistrate. Did Ahsoka breach a contract here by refusing to teach him and instead offering what we all agree is subpar alternative to go Baby Yoda on a seeing
boring trip to Tython?
Yeah.
Am I frozen? Or
I would say she does. She definitely breaches, even if there was not an explicit agreement that, kind of one thing, that kind of quid pro quo of like, I help you liberate the town, you help educate my kid. Even if that wasn't clear, you go back to that kind of equitable argument, and it was clear that that's what Mando thought he was getting out of this deal. He didn't care about the Beskar spear. Like, he doesn't seem interested when the Magistrate offers it to him. He doesn't really seem interested in it when Ahsoka offers it to him. I mean, he's interested in it on like a cultural level, but not above the getting the child educated.
He's like, I'm covered head to toe in this, baby. I don't need one spear. It makes no difference.
So yeah,
I'm rich.
I really think he feels that, as far as his perspective, she did breach the contract by kind of leaving him high and dry with regards to the education, because she could make the argument that Baby Yoda will eventually get taught if he follows kind of all these rules. But it's made it that much more harder. So there, at worst, there was a breach of contract. At best, there was a modification on Ahsoka's part that she didn't tell Mando about. So she acted in bad faith by making this modification, by kind of adding these conditions to how Grogu was going to get tested. I keep calling him Baby Yoda.
You raise like a really interesting point to like his broader narrative, because his task was just to get Baby Yoda into the hands of a Jedi. It had nothing to do with training. And so I was sitting there, and we talked a little bit about this last night, but I was sitting there during the episode waiting for him to just say, well, I don't care one way or the other. You train him, don't train him. Doesn't matter to me.
It's your problem.
Take
now.
him. Yeah, I've completed my quest, but I think it, to your point, it speaks to the level of attachment that he has, that clearly he understands. He doesn't know what Jedi training is, but he understands that there's a difference between somebody just taking him on as a ward and educating him, training him, giving him sort of a different level of care there. So, perhaps he modifies his own quest internally. But
Can I just say that the scene when Mando is holding Grogu in the Razorback thinking he's saying goodbye makes me want to cry every time I see it.
So this is a first in Star Wars because we see a supportive and healthy parental relationship, which we haven't had the luxury of really seeing with a dad. And so she need a little, but that was very Disney-esque with like she's left to die. But we know Bail Organa was a good dad, but we never saw him.
Bail Organa was the best dad. What are you talking about?
That's true. That is accurate.
Never saw it on screen. So we
Kenobi series
possibly, but we have yet to see it on screen, and that would be awesome. I don't disagree with you. I'm totally on board with it. That said, he is so paternal. It is so dad on a road trip. It's not funny, and it's glorious. So,
and I think what was nice was
because it's nice to actually see them. Let's break the habit of having deadbeat dads or Uncle Owen who just seems to be a jerk all the time. Like it's a healthy parental relationship, and that's so nice to see.
Yeah, and I think what was nice too was you actually, we've been kind of it's almost like that a weird version of like will they won't they, because you've kind of been dancing around this idea that Mando is his parental figure, right? And we've talked about this, whether he's his guardian or a parental figure or how that works legally. But you saw it named in this episode. Like she says, he sees you as a father figure. So I thought that was, I almost stood up and cheered when she said that, because it was just putting a name to this relationship. And I think to Thomas's point of how his quest has changed, I think he wants to see Baby Yoda, Grogu, educated so that he can protect himself. And he saw what happened the last time. He left him kind of in the care of somebody supposedly completing his mission. So he wants to make sure that Grogu is taken care of and can either be cared for by somebody who will educate him and what have you, or is educated so that he can take care of himself should, people keep coming for him.
And the other way that this can go with 3 episodes left is the ultimate dad move, like, okay, I have to go take on an Imperial remnant for my kid to be safe. That is true throwing down as a dad. So like
that's what baby Bjorns are made for, and he's already got his satchel, so he's good to go.
Take out a fleet of Star Destroyers. Game on. Let's do this.
I'm gonna cinch it a little tighter. Yeah. Here's some snacks.
Have your frog. We're gonna go blow something up. Yeah. So, again, great episode. I enjoyed it, and there was so much there. And finally, where would we be without talking about Thrawn? Is Morgan Elsbeth a war criminal by default since she's working for Thrawn? And Tom, do you want to take this one?
Thrawn would be. Derivatively, I don't know, because it's unclear what her status is. The background that Ahsoka gives is that she's like a shipbuilder by trade, and we know pretty well that not all shipbuilders are Imperials. They're members of private corporations and stuff, and doing business for the Empire doesn't automatically mean that you get all the legal ramifications that are attached to them. Certainly the Sinar Corporation, just to pick one, they continued to exist and build ships after the Empire fell. So it's not as if that company got gutted and was prosecuted. So unless she's taken some sort of like more official status, like he's, suddenly deputized her, made her official. Like I would think of Governor Price from the Rebels series, who was a civilian and then, got sort of commissioned into the Imperial ranks. Didn't really seem like there was that sort of transition for her, but then again, we don't know a whole lot about her character. And we don't get that cool visual guide until next July, so we really won't know until we see like a little call out for her and get all her history.
So I'm pretty sure Ahsoka let her live because I don't see Ahsoka doing a summary execution.
She's in those little shock towers.
I'm okay with that. And I'm pretty sure Ahsoka used the Force to get her other lightsaber because she'll need that later.
It's in a koi pond. We were all convinced that there was like going to be a water monster in there. It was actually just a koi pond. She'll get that lightsaber back.
Yeah. That was a fake out. We were expecting something more, and it didn't happen. So I will share this wish list that I put together of who I would like to see play Thrawn. And I'll share my notes, and I'm happy to hear what anybody else thinks on who would be a good person to play Thrawn. Matt Smith of Doctor Who fame, Nathan Fillion, Idris Elba. Those are my three. They can all be blue, and they can all get red eyes.
I mean, that anyone can be blue and get red eyes. I will just throw that out there. Nathan Fillion sounds pretty good to me.
I like that entire list.
Yeah, I don't know. I think any of those are too, like, I don't know. I wouldn't say necessarily like comedic. I would have said Titus Welliver, who played the Imperial officer in the episode with Bo-Katan,
Right.
the Imperial officer that commits suicide. I thought he would have been that would have been the first person to come to my mind as a Thrawn type character. But I think you need somebody like more kind of imposing looking. That has.
I wish Mads Mikkelsen hadn't already played a role in Star Wars. He'd be my pick, I think.
Yeah.
Selleck might be old, but he could do it. So he could do
it. DH him a little bit.
He wears a blue outfit anyway. We could totally make that work. So with that, 3 episodes left. We'll see where it goes. I predict a Beskar Spear versus Darksaber fight, but that's just my sense. And this has been a ton of fun. So everyone, thank you.
Yeah, I predict we're getting more Jedi.
Yeah, I'm thinking Ezra Bridger makes an appearance.
At this point, I forget the actor's name. Oh, geez. I follow him on Twitter, so I should know. He's tweeted so much about Ezra and like dangling possibilities that he's playing Ezra that I think at this point it's just a lock that, I don't know if it happens in the context of this show, but, he's breached his NDA and okay with it.
Yeah. Yeah. He's gone full. If he is playing Ezra, which I hope he is, I think he's great. I think, especially given one of his most recent interactions with Pedro Pascal on Twitter, would tend to lean toward that. And I think if he's gone full Mark Ruffalo, and it's just like, spoilers? What spoilers? Like, who cares?
What's his name? Help me out, Gabby. What's his?
Oh,
it starts with an R. Like,
yeah,
it's escaping me, but I'm glad somebody else knows what I'm talking about.
It wasn't. I was thinking Rami Malek, but it's not that.
No, actually, he wouldn't be a bad choice. He's got the cheekbones for Thrawn.
Yeah, I was looking at pictures of Admiral Thrawn and trying to think about who could play him. Definitely needs strong cheekbones.
Yes.
That's a tough one. So with that, everyone, thank you for listening or watching. However you enjoy us, please leave a review. And everyone, stay safe, stay healthy. And this is the way.